In my line of work, we don't believe in the future. We only believe in the layers of the past. My name is Elena. I am a senior conservator of fine arts, specializing in the hopeless. While others spend their careers cleaning the dust off masterpieces, I spend mine in the basement of history, scraping away the lies told by centuries of mediocre painters. I work in a world of solvents, scalpels, and ultraviolet light. To me, a painting isn't a picture, it's a geological site. It is a record of human vanity, fear, and secrets hidden in plain sight. My studio is located in an old industrial building by the river. It smells of linseed oil, turpentine, and the dry, sweet scent of rotting wood. It is a place of absolute control. The temperature is always 18 degrees Celsius, the humidity is exactly 50%. In here, time is suspended. I was sitting at my workbench, examining a 17th-century Dutch landscape under a microscope, when he arrived. There was no knock. The heavy iron door just groaned open, letting in the damp, gray air of the London fog. The man who stepped inside didn't look like a collector. He didn't have the soft hands of an aristocrat or the hungry eyes of a dealer. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal coat that seemed to absorb the light, and his face was a landscape of sharp angles and deep shadows. "Miss Elena," he said. His voice was like stones grinding together at the bottom of a well. "I've been told you are the only person alive who can see what isn't there." I didn't look up from my lens. "I don't look for ghosts, Mr. Vane," he replied. "Victor Vane. And I didn't come for ghosts. I came for the truth." He placed a wooden crate on my table. It was old, cured oak, reinforced with rusted iron bands. He opened it with a key that looked like it belonged to a cathedral. Inside was a canvas, roughly 30 by 40 inches. I stood up and leaned over the crate. I frowned. The canvas was blank. Not empty, but blank. It was covered in a thick, uneven layer of lead-white paint. It looked like someone had tried to whitewash a wall in a hurry. The texture was rough, almost violent. "It's a waste of my time, Mr. Vane," I said, reaching for my coffee. "Someone used this as a practice board. Or they were hiding a bad sketch." "Look closer," Vane whispered. He leaned into my space, and I caught the scent of old paper and ozone. This was found in the private vaults of a family that has ceased to exist. They didn't hide bad sketches. They hid legacies. He pulled out a check and laid it on the bench. The amount was enough to buy the entire building I stood in. "I don't want you to restore it," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "I want you to find the map. There is a sequence of brushstrokes, a hidden geometry beneath the white. My ancestors believed it led to something they called the origin. I need the coordinates." "Art isn't a treasure map, Mr. Vane," I replied, my professional pride bristling. "Everything is a map if you know how to read the landscape," he countered. "You have 30 days. I will provide the chemicals you need. But you must work alone. No assistance. No digital scans sent to the cloud. Only you, the paint, and the light." He left as silently as he had arrived, leaving the heavy oak crate and the scent of the fog behind. I spent the first night just staring at the white surface. I turned on the infrared lamps. I brought the canvas under the X-ray scanner. Usually, this would reveal the appentimenti, the underdrawings, the changes the artist made. But this canvas was silent. The lead white was too thick, acting like a lead shield. It was as if the person who covered this painting didn't just want to hide it, they wanted to kill it. On the third day, I began the scraping. Using a surgical scalpel and a magnifying visor, I started to remove the topmost layer of white, micron by micron. It was tedious, bone-aching work. The studio was silent except for the rhythmic scritch, scritch, scritch of the blade. Around 3 a.m., my blade hit something different. A resistance. I switched to a solvent, a mixture of alcohol and mineral spirits, and gently dabbed the area with a cotton swab. The white dissolved, and a color began to bleed through. It was a deep, impossible blue. Ultramarine. In the 17th century, this pigment was more expensive than gold, made from crushed lapis lazuli. You didn't use this for a map. You used this for the robes of a Virgin Mary or the eyes of a queen. I cleared a square inch. And then another. My heart began to race. It wasn't a map. Not yet. What emerged from beneath the white was a human eye. It was painted with such terrifying realism that I jumped back from the microscope. It wasn't the flat, stylized eye of a Renaissance portrait. It was wet. It had tiny red veins in the corners. And the iris was a storm of gold and hazel. I grabbed my hand mirror from the desk and held it up. I looked at the painting. Then I looked at my own reflection. The eye on the canvas was mine. The shape, the color, the tiny freckle on the lower lid, it was an exact biological match. But the carbon dating of the wood frame told me the canvas was at least 200 years old. I sat back in my chair, the scalpel trembling in my hand. The silence of the studio suddenly felt heavy, as if the air had turned into lead. I wasn't just restoring a painting. I was uncovering a mirror that had been waiting for me for 2 centuries. I looked at the check vein had left. I looked at the eye on the canvas. "Who are you?" I whispered to the paint. And for the first time in my career, I felt like the past was looking back at me, and it was hungry. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ultramarine iris staring at me through the back of my eyelids. I stayed in my chair, the blue light of the X-ray monitor reflecting off my glasses, watching the rain wash over the skylights. By 5 a.m., the paranoia had settled in. I checked the locks on the iron door 3 times. I felt as though the painting wasn't just in the room with me, I felt as though it was breathing the same air I was. "Focus, Elena," I whispered to the shadows. "It's just pigment. It's just chemistry." But chemistry doesn't explain a biological impossibility. I am an only child. My parents were academics who died in a car crash when I was 10. I have no siblings, no cousins, no deep family tree to climb. So how could a painter from 2 centuries ago know the exact topography of my soul? I returned to the workbench. I took a deep breath and picked up the scalpel. If the eye was the center, I needed to see the face. I began to expand the cleaning window, moving outward from that terrifying iris. I used a stronger solvent now, a blend of dimethylformamide and xylene. It's a dangerous cocktail. If you breathe too much of it, it makes the world tilt. If you leave it on the canvas a second too long, it eats through the history you're trying to save. As the lead white dissolved, more of the image emerged. It wasn't just a portrait. The woman, my double, wasn't sitting in a parlor or a garden. She was in a room that looked remarkably like my own studio. I could see the outlines of apothecary jars, the wooden handle of a press, and a window with the same arched frame as the one above my head. But it was what she was holding that made me stop. Her hands were delicate, stained with red pigment. In her lap sat a small, ornate silver box. It was open. Inside the box was something dark, something that looked like a fragment of bone or a dried root. As I uncovered this detail, the room began to spin. Suddenly, the smell of turpentine in my studio was gone. It was replaced by the overwhelming scent of burnt lavender and wet earth. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my right temple. A memory, one that wasn't mine, flashed through my mind. I am standing in a forest. The trees are black, stripped of their bark. I am burying the silver box beneath a stone marked with a star. My hands are cold. I am terrified, not of what I am burying, but of the person who is watching me from the ridge. I gasped, dropping the cotton swab. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white. The vision was gone as quickly as it had arrived, leaving me gasping for air in the 18-degree chill of my studio. "Phantom memories," I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Inhalation of fumes. That's all it is." But deep down, I knew that was a lie. This was a sympathetic restoration. In rare cases, restorers become so attuned to the artist's intent that they begin to experience the emotional state of the creator. But this was different. This wasn't emotion. This was data. I looked back at the painting. The woman's expression had changed. Or perhaps I hadn't seen it clearly before. She wasn't just looking at me, she was warning me. Her lips were parted slightly, as if she were about to speak a single word. I moved the microscope to the bottom right corner, looking for a signature. Usually, the master signs at the end. But beneath the white, in the very corner, I found something else. It wasn't a name. It was a series of numbers, etched into the wet paint with the back of a brush. 51.5074 degrees north, 0.1278 degrees west. I stared at them. My hands were shaking so violently I had to tuck them under my arms. I didn't need a computer to know what those were. They were geographic coordinates. And they pointed to a location less than 3 miles from where I was standing. A knock echoed through the room. It wasn't the heavy, authoritative thud of Victor Vane. It was a frantic, uneven scratching. I approached the door, my heart in my throat. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. But when I looked down, I saw a slip of paper being pushed under the door. I picked it up. It was a page torn from a ledger, dated 1822. The layer must remain white. If the eye sees the sun, the origin will wake. Do not finish the work, Elena. For your sake, and for ours. I threw the door open. The hallway was a tunnel of flickering fluorescent lights and peeling paint. I ran to the stairs, looking down the spiral, but all I heard was the distant sound of the rain and the hum of the building's elevator. I went back inside and locked the door with the deadbolt. I looked at the painting, then at the coordinates, then at the ledger page. Victor Vane hadn't told me the whole truth. He didn't just want a map. He wanted me to open a door that had been painted shut for 200 years. And someone who knew my name, someone who knew my history, was trying to keep it closed. I looked at the silver box in the woman's lap. I realized that if I wanted to know who I was, I had to find that box. I had to follow the map that had been hidden under my own face. I grabbed my coat and my scalpel. I didn't care about the 30-day deadline anymore. I didn't care about the money. The first layer was off. The eye was open. And now, the hunt had truly begun. The coordinates etched into the paint weren't just numbers. They were a destination. $51.5074 degree N, 0.1278 degrees W. In the heart of London, that leads to a nondescript corner near Charing Cross, a place where thousands of people tread every day, oblivious to the layers of history beneath their soles. I left the studio at 4 a.m. The city was a ghost of itself, draped in a thick, sulphurous mist that clung to the street lamps. I felt exposed. Every shadow in a doorway looked like Victor Vane, every passing car felt like a predator. My mind was a fractured mess of ultramarine blue and the smell of burnt lavender. When I reached the location, I found myself standing in front of an old, narrow tenement building that looked like it was being held up by the structures on either side. It was a relic of the Victorian era, its bricks blackened by a century of soot. The ground floor was a shuttered tailor shop. But I wasn't looking at the windows. I was looking at the foundation. I found the entrance to the basement in a narrow alleyway, hidden behind a stack of rusted bins. The lock was ancient, but my hands, the hands of a woman who spends her life manipulating delicate mechanisms, knew exactly how to trick it. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of air that smelled of damp earth and something sweet, something like the rot of old fruit. I descended with only a high-powered LED flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating walls that weren't made of brick, but of the same gray stone I had seen in my phantom memory. And then, I saw it. In the center of the basement stood a massive, wooden pillar. It was carved with the same star-shaped symbol I had seen in my vision. But it wasn't just wood. As I moved closer, I realized the pillar was covered in a thick, translucent resin. And inside that resin were paintings. Hundreds of them. Small, postcard-sized canvases, all painted in that same terrifyingly realistic style. They were arranged in a spiral, winding up the pillar like a DNA strand. I leaned in, my heart hammering. The paintings weren't of people. They were of cells. Microscopic views of blood, neurons, and skin tissue. They were biological diagrams, rendered with the precision of a master artist, dating back to a time before microscopes could even see such things. The origin, I whispered. It wasn't a place. It was a bloodline. I realized then that the family Victor Vane mentioned, the one that had ceased to exist, hadn't died out. They had been archived. They were a lineage of artists who didn't just paint life, they could see into the very fabric of it. And I was the last one left. Suddenly, the flashlight beam caught a movement in the corner of the room. I spun around. A man was standing in the shadows. He wasn't Victor Vane. He was younger, dressed in a medical coat that looked out of place in this damp cellar. He held a syringe in one hand and a digital camera in the other. "You shouldn't have come here, Elena," he said. His voice was trembling. "The restoration was supposed to be a trap. Vane wanted to see if your blood would react to the pigments. He wanted to confirm you were the one." "Who are you?" I demanded, backing away toward the stairs. "A student of the layers," he replied. "Like you. But I know what happens when the origin is awakened. The madness doesn't start with the mind, Elena. It starts with the eyes. You'll start seeing the world as it really is, a swarm of atoms, a chaotic mess of vibration. You won't be able to look at a human face without seeing the skull beneath. You'll be a restorer of a world that doesn't want to be fixed." He stepped into the light. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown out. He looked like he hadn't slept in years. "Vane is using the painting to trigger a biological response in you," he continued, stepping closer. "The chemicals he gave you for the restoration, they weren't just solvents. They were catalysts. You've been inhaling the trigger for 3 days." I felt a wave of nausea hit me. The smell of the basement shifted. The sweet rot became overwhelming. I looked at my hands, and for a split second, the skin seemed to turn translucent. I could see the valves in my veins pulsing, the white of my own bones gleaming through the muscle. I screamed and lunged for the stairs. I heard him shouting behind me, but I didn't stop. I burst out into the alleyway, the cold rain hitting my face like 1,000 needles. I ran until my lungs burned, until the city lights became a blurred, vibrating smear of color. I reached my studio and slammed the door, bolting it with everything I had. I turned to the painting. The white layer was almost gone now. The woman in the portrait, my double, was fully visible. She wasn't just holding the silver box. She was pointing to it. And on the lid of the box, in the painting, were the words, "The last brush stroke." I realized what I had to do. Vane didn't want the painting. He wanted the reaction. He wanted me to become a biological tool, a seer who could find whatever lost secrets his family had buried. But a restorer knows how to change the narrative. I grabbed a bottle of pure nitric acid. My hand was steady now, despite the vibration in my vision. I wasn't going to finish the restoration. I was going to rewrite the ending. But as I reached for the canvas, the light in the studio flickered and died. In the total darkness, I heard the sound of the iron door groaning open. "Elena," Victor Vane's voice drifted through the room, cold and inevitable. "The light is a lie. Don't you want to see the truth in the dark?" The darkness in the studio wasn't absolute. It was a shifting, living thing, filled with the blurred outlines of my tools, the cold gleam of metal, and the spectral glow of the painting, still faintly reflecting the residue of the solvent. My eyes, perhaps already affected by Vane's catalysts, were adapting. I saw the faint, pulsating aura of the dust motes in the air, the subtle currents of the cold draft from the open door. "The truth is rarely beautiful, Elena," Vane's voice echoed, devoid of all warmth. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, each step a pronouncement of his presence. "But you, of all people, should understand its value. You have the gift. The origin runs in your blood." "It's not a gift, Vane," I spat, my voice raw but steady. I was backing away, my hands sweeping across the workbench, searching for something, anything, I could use. It's a sickness. A forced evolution. You're not looking for truth, you're looking for a weapon. A tool, he corrected, his voice closer now, just a few feet from the table. A tool to see beyond the superficial. My ancestors, the true masters of the origin, saw the patterns in everything. They mapped the flow of empires in a single brushstroke, predicted famines in the swirl of a cloud. They didn't just paint life, they saw its code. But the world wasn't ready. They were hunted, their knowledge buried beneath layers of fear and white paint. I found it. Not a weapon, but a small, heavy ceramic mortar and pestle, the kind I used for grinding pigments. It was cold and solid in my grip. And you want to bring that back, I said, my voice carefully neutral, buying time. To what end? So you can see the stock market crash before it happens? So you can manipulate elections by knowing the weakness in a leader's blood? To correct the errors of history, he said, his voice now directly behind the workbench. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. To guide humanity towards its optimal future. You are the key, Elena. Your ancestors, for 2 centuries, have been trying to find the one with the purest bloodline, the one whose eyes could truly see again. You are that one. I felt the phantom memory again, stronger this time. The burning forest. The silver box. The fear of being watched. But now, it wasn't just fear. It was a surge of protective fury. This wasn't just about me, it was about the woman in the painting. My lineage. My choice. The canvas holds more than just a map of cells, Vane, I said, turning slowly, the mortar hidden behind my back. My eyes were fully adjusted now. I could see the faint outline of his silhouette, a dark monolith against the slightly less dark opening of the door. It holds a narrative. And I just finished restoring the final chapter. Show me, he commanded, stepping toward the painting. Show me the origin. He reached out his hand, his fingers brushing against the still damp surface where my solvent had revealed the woman, the silver box, and the words, the last brushstroke. You want to see the truth in the dark, Vane? I whispered. Then let me give you absolute clarity. I took the bottle of nitric acid. In the darkness, the liquid itself seemed to shimmer with a faint, internal light. It wasn't just a powerful solvent, it was a catalyst for a different kind of reaction. My hands moved with the precision of years of training. I didn't pour it on the painting. I aimed for his eyes. The origin isn't a gift, Vane. I screamed, splashing the acid. It's a burden. He roared. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of something ancient and cornered. He stumbled back, clutching his face, the acrid smell of burning flesh instantly filling the studio. I didn't wait. I turned toward the painting. I knew the canvas wasn't just wood and linen. It was stretched over a hidden cavity, a secret compartment that the X-rays had been too weak to penetrate. The coordinates weren't just for the basement. They were for the origin. The real one. I reached for my heaviest scalpel. I ignored Vane's guttural screams, the desperate thrashing of his body against the furniture. My focus was absolute. I plunged the scalpel into the painting, precisely where the woman's hands held the silver box. I cut a perfect square. Behind the canvas, in the darkness, I felt it. Not a map. Not coordinates. But the actual silver box from the painting. It was cold, heavy, and ornate. I fumbled with the clasp. It opened with a soft click. Inside, there wasn't a map or a scroll. There was a single, dried, dark flower. It looked like a century-old rose, but it pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent glow. As I held it, another phantom memory, a tidal wave this time, crashed over me. The woman in the painting, my ancestor, is standing in a medieval garden. She is cultivating a black rose, carefully pruning its thorns. She is the artist. She is the scientist. She is the origin. She isn't seeing atoms. She is seeing the flow of life, the hidden connections. The rose isn't a weapon. It's a key. A key to enhanced perception. But it also leads to madness. I understood everything. The ancestor had painted herself, holding the key, knowing that one day, her descendant would find it. She didn't want the origin to be lost. But she also knew the danger. She hid it in the painting, knowing that only someone with the same genetic code, someone who could feel her memories, could find it. Vane stumbled forward, his hands flailing. I could hear him reaching for me. Give it to me, Elena. Give me the truth. But I knew the truth now. The truth wasn't about seeing everything. The truth was about controlling what you saw. I crushed the dried flower in my palm. The bioluminescent glow intensified, then faded into dust. The memories, the visions, the pulsating aura, they all began to recede, like a tide pulling back from the shore. The overwhelming clarity of the world lessened, replaced by the familiar, comforting fuzziness of normal vision. The master's secret, Vane, I said, my voice calm, as the vision cleared. Was that some truths are better left unpainted. He lunged. I sidestepped, raising the ceramic mortar. It connected with a sickening thud against his temple. He collapsed, a heavy, lifeless mass on the concrete floor. I stood there, breathing heavily, the smell of nitric acid and burnt flesh filling my lungs. The power in the studio returned, flooding the room with stark, unforgiving light. Vane lay motionless. The painting, now with a jagged hole in its center, still hung on the easel. The woman in the portrait, my ancestor, seemed to smile sadly. She had given me the truth, and I had chosen not to wield it. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The veins were no longer visible. My vision was normal. I had killed the origin within me. I had restored myself. They say that a restorer's greatest success is to be invisible. If I do my job perfectly, you never know I was there. My hand vanishes into the history of the canvas. But as I sat on the floor of my studio, watching the morning light crawl across the concrete toward the motionless form of Victor Vane, I realized that I had spent my life trying to be invisible for the wrong reasons. I didn't call the police. In the world of high-stakes art and ancient bloodlines, the police are just another layer of noise. Instead, I called a contact I had made years ago, a cleaner, for the city's private galleries. By noon, Vane was gone, and the studio was scrubbed of the scent of acid and ozone. He wouldn't die, but his eyes, those hungry, ambitious eyes, would never see anything again but the permanent white layer I had splashed onto them. I turned my attention back to the canvas. The woman with my face was still there, though her chest was now pierced by a jagged, square hole. The origin was gone, crushed to dust in my palm. The coordinates were useless. The silver box was empty. I picked up my palette. For the first time in my life, I wasn't restoring someone else's vision. I was creating my own. I mixed a new batch of lead white, but this time, I added a chemical compound I had designed myself. It was a photoreactive pigment, invisible under normal conditions, but capable of changing its molecular structure when exposed to a specific frequency of light, the kind found only in the most prestigious museums in the world. I spent 3 days painting. I filled the hole in the canvas. I covered the eye, the box, and the coordinates. I layered the white over the ultramarine until the canvas was once again a blank, silent void. To the naked eye, it looked exactly as it had when Vane first brought it to me. A piece of nothing. A month later, I donated the blank canvas to the National Portrait Gallery. I labeled it as an anonymous 18th century experimental piece. Because it was empty, they hung it in a quiet hallway, a curiosity for students of minimalist history. Sometimes, I go there. I stand in the back of the room and watch the visitors pass by. They see nothing but a white square. They see a waste of space. But once a day, at exactly 2:14 p.m., the sun hits the skylight at a specific angle. The light filters through the dust motes, hitting the canvas with a concentrated beam of ultraviolet rays. And for 60 seconds, the pigment reacts. The white becomes translucent. The layers beneath begin to breathe. The woman reappears. My double. But she isn't holding the box anymore. Because I repainted her hands. Now, she is holding a brush. And she isn't pointing at the viewer, she is pointing at the world outside the frame. Underneath her, the invisible ink reveals a new message. Not a coordinate. Not a warning. Just a single sentence, we are the ones who choose what remains. I realized that the origin wasn't a biological map. It was a choice. My ancestors weren't cursed with sight, they were cursed with the responsibility of what to do with it. And I had finally accepted mine. I still work in my studio by the river. It still smells of linseed oil and turpentine. But I no longer look for ghosts. I look for the truth that people choose to keep. I've realized that history isn't just a series of layers. It's a conversation between the people who lived and the people who remember. And as long as I hold the scalpel, I get to decide which voices are heard. Vane was right about one thing, the truth is rarely beautiful. But it is always there, waiting beneath the white. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do with a masterpiece is to know exactly where to leave the paint untouched.